Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. You're very welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoor podcast with me, Paul Jeffries, and my brilliant co-host, Anna Marie Watson. And today, listeners and watchers, we are heading over to Tottenham in London, and we are very excited to welcome Frank Irawo. I think if I've got that right, but he can correct me and help us out, listeners, with the surname. But Frank has been known to myself and Anna Marie, and through Annie Lee and Nature's Blueprint, and we're going to let Frank tell all about himself to all of you as we build that. But it's very exciting to have Frank. And so, Frank, perhaps in some brief words, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we can dig deeper into getting to know you as we go through the podcast.
Of course, Paul. Thank you so much, Paul and Anna Marie, for having me here. My name is Frank Bolaji Irawo. It's not an easy name to be pronounced using English letters because there are actually intonations that you would use in the language. And just out of curiosity for people who are wondering, that is a Yoruba name from Nigeria, as my parents are of Nigerian heritage. I was born in the UK, and I'll go into that probably as appropriate later as we go on. But yeah, like I said, my name is Frank Bolaji Irawo, father of two, happily married, born in the UK of Nigerian descent, like I said. I was actually born here, and then my parents they came over here to the UK for educational purposes, then went back to Nigeria. So myself and my sister headed back to Nigeria, the whole family, and then we were raised there. I did my primary, secondary, and university education over there, and then came back over actually in the 80s, late 80s. But I've now been here in the UK longer than I've been in Nigeria. So I've got a rich mix of both cultures, is probably fair to say. And as rightfully said, the kind of connection of me kind of being here is through Nature's Blueprint, which I'll say more as we go along, and the force that is Annie Lee, of course, talk about all of that. But I've had an interesting in terms of career. I actually studied applied physics and then ended up in IT, was an IT engineer, IT project manager, and then turned coach, poet in residence. So it's quite an interesting mix, I would say.
I love an eclectic mix, particularly within the coaching world. For me, that's what I feel brings the richness to our profession. And actually, there is a need to seek knowledge and wisdom and experience from other disciplines, or else, I don't know, it just comes all a little bit of an echo chamber and same. And for me, it is all about growth and difference, and how can we challenge and critique ourselves as coaches so that we do grow and are not just potentially, and this is my opinion, a force for capitalist growth, because it is far more complex than that, and coaching has so much more to offer. Anyway, aside, coming back, Frank, it is delightful to have you in the virtual room. I was lucky enough to meet Frank in person at a Nature's Blueprint event in Bristol earlier this year, and was absolutely blown away by his words. And I will hands up admit, when I hear poetry, I kind of almost get like little shivers of dread of going back to like English literature at school and just trying to write poetry and just abysmally failing. Though letting your words wash over me, sat surrounded by like-minded people, was just phenomenal. And I'm so grateful for Annie Lee facilitating the introduction. And then clearly we had to have a poet in residence at Henley. And that's why we were so keen to get you on the podcast now, before our event, which is literally coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So hopefully, listener, you are listening in now to get a sneak peek. Hopefully you're coming along to Henley as well. And if not, well, this is what you're basically missing out on. So yeah. Anyway, enough from me. Our tried and tested classic, which all our guests get a little flavor of answering. What is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And it is kind of a two-parter question, which I know is not great coaching. And why do you love being outdoors so much?
Right. So the outdoor is quite an interesting one. I reflected on this as I knew I was coming on the podcast because mine is a slightly interesting case because I'm kind of in the process of reconnecting with the outdoors, really, in a way. And what the thinking about this question and kind of my response to it, I kind of was thinking, oh, wait a minute, I forgot in kind of the growing up of the genesis of what we took for granted. Like I said, I grew up in Nigeria and the outdoors was just there. So it was not something that was considered like, or a different thing to your existence. Because like, oh, I'm indoors and then now I really want to go out and experience the outdoors. It was almost the way the houses were built, the way the environment was, it was integrated whole. In fact, I was slightly shocked when I came back to this country and I kind of looked at the houses and they were joined up at the hip. And I was kind of going, who owns that house? Because in Nigeria, when you build a house, you build it, you have a garden and stuff around. Do you sort of say everything is integrated and it's, you know, you have that breadth of space and everything is just there. And I can remember growing up and, you know, we as children would go out and play and there'll be trees with fruits and, you know, you kind of don't need to know who owns it. It's there, it's got fruit on it, you climb on it, you take what you need. It was just that whole coming a life of just taking it all for granted. I'm going to be honest. It's like, you know, you just enjoy it. You know, we used to build kites and fly them in the air and get them caught in trees and everything else. And yeah, it was just part of your growing up, just being outdoors. And then coming into the UK, and like I say, experiencing kind of lots of houses and not much in the way of outdoor there and getting involved in kind of the grind and the hustle of doing things that would make sure you put food on the table and all of that. It's kind of something that lost focus for me in that regard. And curiously enough, actually, my reconnecting to nature was due to COVID. Um, and it was actually the point at which we were almost incarcerated more or less at home that actually created that sense of, oh, wait a minute, actually, now we're not outdoors. Now we're really indoors and we're not having the opportunity to just be out there. And there's a friend of mine I'd been connecting with online for quite a while, and he suggested being intentional about that opportunity to go outside, do it, go out there. He actually suggested I start hugging trees, but I thought I'll draw the line there. I'll just go outdoors. And then I realized actually I live not far as Paul was saying. I'm in Tottenham. Actually, maybe 10 minutes walk one way, and I'm not far from the canal and Lee Valley and all that kind of, yeah. So we started being intentional about Saturdays. We'll go out and have a long walk, come back, and I began to slow down a bit to actually notice what was there. And that for me began to be that sense of reconnecting to what the outdoors was and observing the things that one had taken for granted.
Frank, that's fantastic, and so much for us to take in there. And you know, it's really nice to have somebody as well with that different perspective, as you say, your childhood around Nigeria, and it's interesting how space is just there. It's part of very much life around the housing in Nigeria and stuff. And as you say, I guess you were very much part of it. It was part of you. You were part of it. And it's interesting, the analogy when we come to the UK and there's that we connect houses, they almost look linked together. There's no space, particularly in urban environments. And so it's really lovely for all of our listeners to think about the intention of going out. And finding space, finding what that might be. And we have people on the podcast who have recently spoken about urban environments and just being outside and finding different environments that work for you. And COVID, of course, was such a great, leveler for us all to head outside and reconnect and try to find a different perspective. So I'm super pleased you're reconnecting. That sounds amazing. And I think our listeners are going to hear how well and how much you're reconnecting. And, even, I dare I say, even offer us some pathways for in the future of this podcast to perhaps how we could do that. So that's really lovely and a beautiful answer to that question. So, Frank, what we would like to do now is almost take some stepping back through this golden thread of your life. And we're going to kind of where you are today, and you're doing the amazing work that you're doing. But what are the sort of the key, I guess, threads, milestones throughout your life that has led you to this place today? Could you take us through that?
Wow, now that could take a while. I'll try and be succinct, shall we say.
Fantastic.
So what for me, kind of both worlds, coaching brought both of my worlds together, and I'll explain what those worlds are. So as a young person, I've always been curious about people, what makes them tick, what is the thing that makes us make the choices we do, and how could we live a life that in a way serves us better and avoids kind of needless mental suffering. And a lot of those inquiries and thinking, at least, had come through spiritual communities that I was a part of, because I was raised in a Christian context. And in those settings, even from when I was young, I was, part of the youth leadership in the church, or I'd be involved in Bible study, I'd be involved in kind of house groups, I'd be involved in I was a youth leader at one point. I was even part of the band or choir, as people would call them in some settings. So I was always kind of interacting with people. I was always engaging with people. And I ended up in those spaces where I would be the people might come to if they were in some difficulty or working through certain things in life, and I would be the wise one, so to say, who would they'd say, I'd listen, I'd think, and then I'd go, well, okay, these are the principles involved here, and these are the things you may do or may not do, and things like that. So I've always had let's put it this way, a spiritual perspective, that context of spiritual perspective, and human beings being more than just their thinking. Let's put it that way. And so in many ways that had always been at the back of my mind. And then at some point in my growth and development, and through that setting and networking with different people, I came across some material by someone called Robert Kiyosaki called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And the whole idea behind that was really helping people establish better ways to build wealth that was sustainable and doesn't mean that you kind of work all hours God sends and you burn yourself out and things like that. So I said, oh, this is the thing. So I'm going to become a coach. So it was going to be a coach to help people do that. But first, I obviously have to live it. So I kind of went on this journey of trying to follow those principles and stuff. And curiously enough, rather than getting wealthy, I was almost bankrupt, I think is the best way to put that. And that really got my attention, because I'm thinking, how have I taken all these things that people claim works, and I've seen evidence that it's working for some people, and in my case, I've somehow ended up in this kind of financial crevice, so to say. And really, that was a gift from the universe in a way, because it helped me begin to reflect more. I started journaling, I started reviewing, and then I realized, oh, okay. It became apparent to me that what was driving me was this idea that I wanted to be seen as successful, and I was looking to acquire all the trappings that people would associate with success. And I was hoping that by doing that, I will feel enough. And I would, and what I discovered in my inquiry, and one of the books that really transformed my look on all this, was a book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. And what the premise there was, you are not your mind. And the idea that I was already enough, and I didn't need those things outside to be enough. But if I came from the place of being enough, what would that look like and how would I show up? Um, so I say all that to say that what I then began to do was look at, okay, what can I do or how can I be and use all these things I'm learning without trying to, because the whole pull and what drove me into the financial conundrum I was in was I was trying to earn passive income so I didn't have to do the work I was doing, and therefore I could go and become a full-time coach. And I was thinking this kind of coach would have a shop on the high street, right coach at the top door, and people will walk in and say, yeah, I've seen your sign saying coach, I think I need one of those. And as you know, that's not how it worked. But at the time, that was my story. That was how I was going to do. And then kind of the message I got was, okay, these things that you're now learning that's helping you recenter and refocus, share that with people you're already working with rather than trying to escape the workplace. Maybe that is the place you're meant to be of service. And that kind of got me on the journey of looking at, okay, how can I support people around me with the knowledge and understanding that I had? And then we got some coaches into the workplace where I was, and they were trying to teach us to move from from waterfall coaching to agile coaching. And it was frustrating to start with. I was thinking, just tell us what to do. Just tell us how to do it, and we'll do it. And they kept saying, no, if you were to do this, how would you do it? And in what way would you do it? And how it worked for you? And if you did that, what do you think would happen? But in the end, I saw the wisdom of why they were taking that approach. I think that's how I got introduced to the power of coaching as opposed to counseling and giving advice. It was kind of like, oh, eventually when the business got rid of these coaches, if they had just told us what to do, then we'd be stuck. So the sense of agency that we got, and I thought, okay, I think this coaching thing might be the way that I need to support people. And then I went to retrain as a coach. And that's how I ended up in coaching.
Interesting. And I'm sure if you're listening in, there's some real kind of classics that might be resonating with you as well. And if you've been on your coaching journey, that bit around just being quiet and not giving the answer or solutionizing, it's that stepping back and creating the space and listening and asking questions and being curious. And you're not there to fix it. Which, yes, I work in the capacity as a coach supervisor, and it's interesting when you have new coaches coming through how we want to help, and actually helping is like, here's a gift, here's the answer, and actually no, it's that agency as you mentioned. And I think the other piece that caught my attention is something that I've kind of been flirting with in the moment, is around this like doing and being and the interface between it. And I will hands up admit that I am a doer, like I'm a planner, like do, like to the state of exhaustion. And ultimately, we are human beings, and how can we be? And I'm loving the spiritual element that you're bringing into it, and actually how that has been a real strong foundations for your journey. And this is what I find fascinating with coaches, because we are all unique. We all bring our authentic selves to the coaching relationship and partnership, and what is within that system, and how that then shapes the way that we show up, and actually who is attracted to work with us. Because I'm not the coach for everybody, you're not the coach for everyone, we'd all work with very different people, and yet at the heart of it there are similarities there as well. So no, very rich conversation so far, Frank, absolutely loving it. I am mindful that we were going to have a little bit of poetry smattered between questions. So feel free whenever you think is appropriate to offer a little nugget of your work. Whether now, I am going to just offer the next question as well. So this is very much like getting to the heart of your work. Which is around the poetry, and how do you partner with nature as a poet and a coach? So take the floor as you desire.
Thank you so much, Anna-Marie. Yes, yes. The invitation to smatter things with poetry is very much one I'd like to take. And there's this piece that I think it's really maybe begins to create the context for the question you asked. This one is called self-aware. Being aware of the self that is aware. That is where the journey of transformation begins. The genesis of every evolution from within. Where do you stand to observe? Seeing from the inside out, that which parades as the self, the object separate from subject, not possible without the space. Space to stand, space to see, space to think, space to be aware that you are the one aware of the illusion of the single self. And really that begins to speak to the heart of kind of where I'm coming from. And in my work as a coach. And again, this is a very good place to really begin to bring in the Anna Lee element of my story, which is that where I did my coaching training at Barefoot, she was the one who supervised my essay, because I did a postgraduate certificate in coaching and we had some essays to write. And one of the essays I wrote actually was putting forward my case for why I prefer transformational coaching rather than transactional coaching. And the distinction of that being for me the idea that if I'm here to help with something that you could get in a training course, or if we're looking just as the surface elements of the symptoms rather than the root cause, then for me, that's an opportunity missed. And because of the spiritual context in which I come from, I always like going deep enough. And like you say, that's not for everybody, to the point where we can really look at what's going on. And in the evolution of the work I do with people, one of the big messages I'm trying to help people see is that if we create the right amount of space between you and what you consider to be your mind, your thoughts, then you develop a sense of agency to begin to discover that actually not everything that shows up in your mind is helpful. And you get the space and sense of agency to be able to choose where you become a witness and just witness what's going on, assess that it's helpful or not, and decide whether or not you're going to connect your energy to those thoughts in order to begin to see it as something you want to pursue or give more and more space to. Um, and I actually created a framework just to bring people into this. And this, you'll see how this connects to nature as I kind of eventually break that down. The point being that I think a lot of us, like I was, don't have the space to really notice nature and notice our connectedness with it, because we're lost in our minds, we're lost in that space. So you could physically be in the space where nature is present, but not be connected to it, not be benefited from it fully, because we're lost in that mind and over-identified with it. So the space is a framework where S is see your true essence as not just your mind, but the one who observes the mind. P is the present to the source of confusion. When you begin to experience energy that gets you agitated and discombobulated and fully like you're not feeling like what you're experiencing is your innate peace and well-being, then very often that can be linked to the mind in some ways. And then the next bit, the A, is the idea that you ascend that thinking. In other words, you take the seat of the witness and begin to think, okay, what's going on here? Well, where is my mind being lost in this? Because what a lot of us might not be aware of is that our minds can often really be lost in the past, or trying to predict a future that it can't really accurately predict. So it's the idea that, okay, in order to enjoy what nature has for us, we need to be present, we need to be in the now. And very often trying to fight our thoughts and say, no, I don't want that thought, I want to be present, actually is counterproductive, because it needs more thinking in order to fight the thinking. So it's just kind of just observing that this is just thinking and letting that thinking flow. And if you don't really engage with it, eventually it's kind of subsides, and then you can reconnect and focus your attention. So C is for connecting to the present, either by just observing your breath or asking this question: am I Who is the one who is aware? I am the one who's aware. And that brings you back into the essence of who you are. Then you can the ease experiencing what's there, which if you are in nature, then you can really observe the nature there. And as we'll come to later, there's so much you can learn from nature when you're present, when you're really there.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Frank. So much for us to discuss there, but reflection, space, really connecting both with ourselves inwardly, but then the systemic world around us. And you're so right. So many of us live in the future, the past sometimes, and how productive and how useful are those thoughts? And I love your question there. I'm aware, and we're seeing more and more people, more and more courses building reflection into leadership or people, or kind of how people might approach stuff. And so I love that, and I'm certainly on your side of transformational rather than transactional. I think trying to get to the bottom of perhaps some of these thoughts, limiting beliefs, or whatever might be limiting us within ourselves or within a current perspective. And so, I can really see, and I know we're going to build out into some of your, your work and models, but I am certain, listeners, there must be plenty that has come out of that discussion there with Frank. Please make any comments, and let's start a conversation about that. But no, I mean, really, really fantastic, and connecting both with nature and within the nature that is within you and yourself. Both are very important. Fantastic. So moving into the beautiful poem that Frank has just shared with us, which was really, really lovely. Our listeners love to hear some stories from our guests, and obviously respecting any client confidentiality, but are there any stories that illustrates the power of what you offer for your clients, and that whole magical combination of nature, poetry, and coaching, Frank?
Right. So actually, to kind of really do justice to that is to give the genesis really of myself and Anna Lee and how we came to be Nature's Blueprint, because in a way that is where my poetry came into my coaching in that regard. Okay, and nature as well. So to give context to that, I originally was what you would call a fundamentalist Christian. So it's kind of the idea behind that is, if I were to meet you, my concern would be, have I converted you? Have I made you see things my way? And that kind of thing. So I then went through a phase of where I began to embrace a different flavor of spirituality, which was more inclusive, which was more kind of seeing the person and not necessarily a religious label around them, but really seeing the essence of who they are, which is why that is the first part of that framework that I introduced. But I say all that to say that in that journey, and as I began to document that journey and what I was learning through that, poetry came to me as a way of expressing what I was learning. And so that's where poetry came into the picture. But when I then retrained as a coach, I began to see themes that were coming up in people that were common threads. And it occurred to me that poetry might be a way to summarize and create some thinking tools around those things and help people go deeper. So what used to happen was sometimes I'd offer poetry within coaching sessions so that people can reflect and think a bit more differently about what they're looking at. And then after a while, then it began to show up more as post-reflection. So with something will come up in coaching, I'll send it to clients and they'll look and see what that is. But the whole idea of a poet in residence setting actually came about because Annie Lee, like I said, was my, supervisor of my essays and things like that. And then she decided to start Nature's Blueprint, which is about people connecting with nature. People want to make a difference, be better stewards of this planet, and be more connected, and things along those lines. And she said to me, Frank, I think it'd be good for you to come. I think you should come. And then I kind of well, I'd never said anything to her to suggest I was interested in nature in the least. And I suppose at that point, it was just my personal experience and my personal recollection that was on the table. I was not in any way looking to Nedley do anything about that. It was just kind of my personal journey. And then I went to the Nature's Blueprint launch, which is about 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe that much time has gone past. And of course, me being in any space I'm in, reflections and my thoughts, I put them down and I start writing and things pop up. And really, it was from there that lots of poetry just began to bubble as I began to learn about the connection between our guts and I learned about the connection between the soil and regeneration farming and avoiding ultra processed food and all those kind of different things that were just coming out. And I was on learning and really capturing this in poetry and then began to share posts on LinkedIn about it and things like that. And then I began to realize, oh, actually, this is interesting. Oh, now I see the wisdom of being present in the space because actually I am learning about nature. And by using my gifts, I'm connecting with people and encouraging people to connect with nature because the language of nature is such that when we connect with it properly, is beyond words, beyond logic. And the beauty of poetry actually is that it has a way of speaking, even though it's using words, directly to the heart. And at that point, when you connect directly the heart to nature, to who we are, then I saw the beauty and the magic of it. And that really centered me in this idea of, okay, I can see where both coaching, poetry, and nature come together in the system of the humanity of who we are. So that's one story. I'll give you one more story, which relates to the background I've currently got behind me. And that is, I began to embrace this idea of poet in residence. I do work with a charity because one of the things I discovered when I was going through the financial crisis I had and I was trying to be rich and others so people knew I was successful and all that. My grandmother, who's my shiro, like I say, I reflected on her and I thought to myself, well, she made a big difference in people's lives that at the point at which she died, we really began to understand the impact she had. And this was about 30 years ago. Because in our village in Nigeria, she, at her death, like the people showed up as if the mayor had just died. And I thought to myself, okay, the reflection is she wasn't rich. In fact, she got pocket money, if you like, from my mother because she didn't work, right? And yet she made the difference. And here am I trying to chase the money so I could say I was rich and I was important. And I thought, okay, what is the difference? The difference was she cared for people and she used whatever resource she had to show that care. And I'll never forget, there's these street hawkers who come and sell stuff. And there was this particular lady who used to come to sell stuff to my grandmother. And my grandmother would listen to her, she would greet her, she would hear her stories. And then once in a while, she'd go in and get some clothes and give it to her. And so when this woman realized my grandmother died, my mother had to console her. That's how distraught she was. And all this made me reflect. The local bakery donated 200 loaves of bread to my grandmother's funeral. And all this just made me realize, oh, wait a minute. It's not the money you have. It's not the wealth and the affluence. It's what you give back. It's the legacy you live in the lives of the people you meet. It's the way in which you touch them. It's the way in which you connect with them. It's the way you make them feel seen and heard and that you care about them. Oh, I could do that even without money. So I started volunteering at a food bank and doing things like that. And the amazing thing was the feedback of feeling good about myself that I had in those moments was more than I've ever received from acquiring any wealth or anything like that. So I say all that to say that that really got me thinking. And I actually did a book of poetry called Dream, really, and the proceeds of that book went to several charities. And one of those charities was Charity Water. And Charity Water, I became a volunteer for them. I then they had something in the Other Art Fair, which is an art fair for people, affordable art. And there I began to see artists and look and think, oh, there is a relationship between art and poetry. That actually, I look at their work, I'm inspired. I write, And when they see the poetry with their work, they go, wow, okay, that's wonderful. That's amazing. Okay. So I decided to start going to these art fairs just to get inspiration. And on one such occasion, I was actually about to leave, and then I saw this stand in front of me, and I saw something not too dissimilar from what's behind me, but it was on a massive scale. It was a big, big, big painting. And I took one look at it, and because of the way the artist paints, her name was Hazel Thompson, I got to find out. And she does this painting of nature, and it looked like you could walk into it. That's really what captured me. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. So we got talking. I made arrangements to kind of connect with her outside of it. And to cut the long story short, it turned out that we were similar age, we had similar interests, and she had burnt out doing her work in catering, not having followed her passion to paint. And then as she burnt out, that was like the universe. I call that the fuse of the universe, kind of just getting your attention back to go, okay, you're missing something. And then she went back to her love for creative arts and her love for nature. And she brought the two together and began to create this fantastic paintings. And we began to just marry our work together. And we're currently in a collaboration to create a book that helps people move from being lost in the screen like I was. Because when I was in IT, I'm happy to spend all day in front of a big screen, and I never really connected to nature. And so the idea is that to help people move from virtual reality to nature's reality. And I'm sure we'll get to talk more about that later. But those are two ways in which what I do in terms of coaching, in terms of poetry and nature come together.
And if you are watching on video, you will see a beautiful image behind Frank, which has got the bluebells. It's that tinge of blue, which they only appear for such a brief period of time each year. And then the light, the dappled light coming through the trees is beautiful. And Frank has shared a number of images and spoken words, and I hope we'll be able to maybe share that with our listeners as well, which gives like just a little nugget, a flavor of what the bigger book project is going to be. Yeah. So taking a little bit of a sidestep, and this is maybe when you're working with other people, and almost for me, harking back to that inner teenager struggling with words and fitting them together and sense making and poetry. And I know that part of what you do and what you're going to be doing at Henley as well is a workshop on poetry. So what's the biggest challenge you've observed for individuals to kind of embrace that inner poet? And then how do you support individuals to overcome that?
That's an excellent question, because actually that's one of my passions really, is to activate the poet in everybody. And I think what uniquely qualifies me in that space is that I actually didn't study poetry to any great degree. In fact, a small side story is that originally my path in life would have been law. Because I was so interested in the logic of mind and how people think, and having to investigate things and having to use the logic of mind to work things out and assess. And the only reason I didn't go down that path was because in the Nigerian education system, you need to be reasonably good at English literature, not English, that was separate, English literature. And that was all the Shakespeare, and that was all the different kinds of, poetry in that context and everything like that. Problem I had was I'm not very good. I'm very good in deductive logic, but I'm not good in rote learning. So just learning something off heart that I couldn't establish logic with, to be able to go, okay, if I had to deduce this myself, I could deduce it on the fly and then reproduce it. If I just learned things with it, it just never worked. So as a result, I followed the science route, and actually maths ended up being my favorite subject. And at one point, actually, I was suggested that I should read that at university, but we had this stereotype in Nigeria that people who studied maths in university ended up being eccentrically mad, basically. So as a result, I kind of thought, nah, I don't fancy that. So I left it alone and went applied physics instead. But ultimately, I say all that to then say, because I haven't come from that, like having studied that at any high level, my approach to it, and like I said earlier on, is poetry found me. I just started playing around with it. And to me, poetry is the language of the heart. Now, what I've found is most people actually get, how can I put it? So because of the, and I think you alluded to this, Anna Marie, because of the way they had encountered poetry in an academic setting, there becomes this idea that there's a right and a wrong way to do poetry, and that there is a way where poetry is something to be assessed and considered better than or not as good as this or the other. My framework and entry into poetry is that where poetry is the language of my heart, and this is what my heart speaks, then it is true and it is valid for what it is. And therefore, actually, the purpose of it is really to get out of me something that an inner wisdom of mine knows that maybe my logic might not necessarily grab like that. And I find it a very effective way to communicate in the way that uses words, but uses it in a way that allows people to, for their heart to connect with it first before their mind tries to make sense of it. And so what I would say to answer your question to people, so I was recently put in residence at a 4-day retreat. And I ran a workshop for this exact purpose, which is to help tease out the inner poet of the people who were present. And it's something similar that we'll be doing at Henley as well. I'll bring something like that to it. And what I said to them was, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will incarcerate the poetry police. So whatever it is that you think is the judge of your poetry, I am going to incarcerate that poetry police. And we are going to make sure that it is not present in the room so that your inner critic can go to sleep. And then we can give room for you to not think about it, but just allow your heart to speak. And when you can get people in that space where they're just focused in the present moment, connected and present with themselves and not in their head, and just start writing, the poetry flows.
So what comes to mind, listening to you, Frank, is the closest I get to this, and I hope maybe this helps listeners, is when you're given a card to write, and maybe it's perhaps someone's passed away and they've died, and or there's some sincerity or something. And sometimes people say to me, Paul, you sometimes always find beautiful words to write in a card. It's because I give over to my heart. I don't think about what I'm writing. I really don't. I just connect with the emotion of the death or the sadness or the elation, because we write happy cards. And the words just fall out of me. But I guess it's your point. The poetry police, they're not around, or the words police are not around to say, because what I'm writing is truthful and it's my truth. And that's the closest, and that's what was kind of I was connecting with listening to you. And it's almost letting yourself go. And I loved what you said about get the words out before you start to think too much about them. Because we can always then look at that and, but there's something really lovely. And I think that beautifully answers Anna Marie's question around how do you challenge people to just, so you incarcerate the police and you just let it all come out. It's fantastic. But I really hope the listeners that helps, because I that's kind of what I felt listening to you. And it really resonated with me. So thank you very much for allowing me to connect to that thought. So Frank, as a poet, we always come up with this magic word, writer's block and so on. And we have the same sometimes in coaching, where we have this mental sort of stuckness in our coaching or life, or people are trying to move through something. I guess really what have you kind of, experienced, and how did you break through these types of states that you may have seen both in your clients or within your own work?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's a brilliant place to bring in this phrase that I call myself a TransFLOWmation coach, intentionally, because it's a play on words between transformation and flow. And the premise of my coaching really is that whatever it is that you feel called to, that's calling you within your heart, and you feel you're trying to do, that you feel that you're stuck in, the idea being that actually that the ability to do those things, the essence of you in you is already there. My job is not to add to you what you don't have. It's to find out what's blocking what's there and let it flow out. And that is the process of transformation. And what brings both of my work in poetry and coaching together is trying to activate insight, and that insight allows people to see and understand what's going on, and their ability to then move beyond that and experience that transformation. So they can be about the doing of the thing that's already in them that wants to be expressed. And so that reframe is normally the first thing, that you're not trying to get something you don't have. You're actually making room for what's already in you to come out. So we need to focus on what's the blockage. And very often the blockage is mental. The blockage is in the mind. And here's what's counterintuitive. And this is why I always start really with that space framework, because it addresses all these elements. Who you are, you've got everything you need. Where's the confusion? Where's the stuckness apparently coming from? It's going to be mind in some way. And then the A being that bit of, okay, how do you ascend to that rather than fight that? Because here's the counterintuitive thing that tends to happen is that the more stuck we feel we are, the more we try and force and push through. And the more we try and force and push through, the more actually we exacerbate that sense of stuckness, because you can't use force to step beyond something that is merely a concept that it's lost or is stuck or whatever. So actually, very often the best thing is to stop trying, which might sound crazy, but the best thing actually is to stop trying and go and distract yourself, do something else, or focus on, or go and look at something that you think is working. Go and spend space in something that is flowing. And miraculously, by having that space and distracting your mind from, or doing something else that is giving you that positive feedback, actually loosens up. And then all of a sudden you get inspiration, you get thoughts, you get things that come out, and you go, oh yeah, I could do that. Oh yeah, that's an idea. And so that often I find works quite well.
It's that piece around attention, and your words there just took me back to this piece around time travel, like forwards and backwards, and how when we're placing our attention beyond ourselves onto something else, or whether it's something in the future or something in the past, and we're creating a story around it, and then how that can just place us in a total bind. And yeah, just letting go and doing something else can be kind of quite liberating. And it's giving our unconscious mind permission to just noodle away in the background, and then bloop, like something emerges. And our logical brain is like, where did that come from? I didn't think it up. It just emerged. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of the point. It's not from your thinking brain. It's from beyond that. So I mean, flow. I the whole flow state is something that I have spent years experimenting with, particularly from like the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. It energetic. It transcends all of the different realms. And for me, within my running, a lot of that has been that state of like pursuit of peak performance and flow and getting into it, when everything just feels so easy and time strips away and the inner critic is paused and silenced. So we'd just love to give you a bit more space to maybe lean into this concept of flow. And yes, we've talked a little bit about transaction, transformation, flow. You've got a framework, maybe a story with some individual that you've supported within that. Just want to give you a little bit more space to to touch on that?
Yeah, before I do that, actually, there's something I wanted to put on the table, which I think so there was, like I said, that retreat I was put in residence for. One of the things we did there, which I found very powerful, because again, this helps us when we go into nature, and I found it so helpful, which was that we did something called a walk, a mindful walk through nature. And what was specific about that was we were going to go so slow, very slow. And this really made me realize how, even when I'm in nature, how quickly I walk. And it's like, oh yeah, there's a green tree there, there's a thing in there, and then and just by being that slow and purposeful to observe what is actually there, it was to me quite revealing. And I want to take that opportunity to share this piece, and then I'll come back to your story, if that's to your question, if that's all right. This one is called Nature's Surprises. Nature is full of surprises. Plants of many shapes and sizes. One tree falls, another rises. One stands disheveled, and the other flourishes. Side by side, none vying for prizes. From the bark of the fallen, new life arises. Buds at the ready to bloom in glorious splendor, radiant with colors, at home in a rainbow. When the silent clock strikes spring. And I just felt that was just such an interesting reflection on what becomes available, at least for me, when I slowed down. I observed all this when I took the time to really slow down and notice what was in front of me. And I'll come back to that later when we talk about this whole reality framework about that the book is based around. But going back to the idea of flow, what I found out when I'm working with clients is that, and there was a particular client I was working with who was an executive in the finance industry, and there was this whole idea about how busy it was and how much it needed to be done and how much it needed to be accomplished and how it felt like there wasn't enough time. They were having to work extra and having to do all these bits. And what was interesting to me is because my style of coaching is conversational. So we're having a conversation, we're talking about, okay, what's happening right now that may be indicative of that will help see this. So we're having this conversation, we're thinking, and what we discovered, which I knew that anyway, but I wanted her to discover it herself, was actually most of the energy was consumed by the thought about the doing and not the actual physical doing itself. And it was the idea that, okay, if you were more present in the moment and connected to what you're doing, and you did what you were inspired to do in the moment about that thing, and then the rest of the time you left that alone and just continued doing whatever else you needed to do, that actually that will put you in a state of flow where you are just doing. And what happens, at least in my experience that I found, is that you get ideas and you have innovative approaches to things that actually means you get things done quicker in less time without the drama of all the rumination and the being afraid of what might happen if it didn't go right and if this and all that things that either what happened in the past and how it might replicate in the future and a future that may never happen because the mind's just cooking it up. So it's kind of that is really the way in which I help people to approach things in a way that means that they enjoy the experience more and there's less needless suffering mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, I think one for me as well, Frank, has just really resonated with the poem and that slowing down and stopping. I work extensively a lot in, I suppose, business and corporate where people are busy, never noticing, not always slowing down. And so this work you're doing around walking slowly, getting out in nature, reconnecting, and just really seeing. And it really, really is, it really resonates, I think, and just noticing things, slow down and see what it means for you. and how do you connect to it? And then that conversational style of it's interesting, isn't it? Stop flowing, but kind of ruminating around thoughts, but just start doing something and sort of, kind of getting into it, and then that whole thing starts to come together. So it's fantastic, and thank you again for sharing that beautiful poem. That was really lovely. So what advice would you offer our listeners who are keen to start a poetic journey, I guess? I mean, listeners will have been with us now for 45 minutes. I would imagine there's a lot of excitement, and people are beginning to think, I can do this. Frank is laying a pathway for me that I can do this. How would they start that journey? What advice would you give them?
My advice to them would be, first of all, just know that your heart has something to say, and to get present with that heart and say, what is present for me now? What is present for me now? And then just start writing, and not worry about what it looks like or whether it rhymes, because another misconception with poetry is somehow it has to rhyme for it to be poetry. Poetry is really just what your heart wants to say, and the idea is just write. And you put it so beautifully, Paul, the last time. He's like, when you're writing a card and you're not thinking about it, it just flows. It's the same way poetry will flow. The other thing that inspires people is, if poetry is something you're really interested in writing, then just spend time reading poetry, spend time listening to people reading poetry. Because what I've found happens very often is, when I'm in spaces and I'm performing poetry, I wouldn't performing is probably over egging it a bit, when I'm reading poetry, and encouraging people to try it out, trying it once, and they see and are surprised by it, because, as Anna Marie said earlier on, it's that I call the logic mind the press secretary. It's the one that wants to take credit for everything that comes out. You've heard that this conversation around left brain, right brain. So the left brain is the utilitarian part of the brain that wants to take credit for everything and believes that everything arises and ends in it. And then you've got the kind of right brain perspective, which holds the left brain in perspective, but the left brain wants to deny and kind of just go take credit for everything. So when you connect to your heart and just write and it flows, you will surprise yourself, because your deeper inner wisdom manifests through that. And that will encourage you to write more, number one. Number two, like, say, when you're listening to performances that go around where that poetry is happening, you begin to see the sense of possibility around poetry. So you write it. And again, the other thing I like to say is, it doesn't have to be poetry. It could just be writing, journaling. Poetry is just one form of writing. Just even if it's just a practice of journaling. I mean, my life was transformed when I began to see back what I was writing, capturing the journey I was going through, and looking at the patterns that arose out of looking at what I was writing. And then it was also like looking at myself in the mirror that I somehow had created, that reflected more accurately, because our mind very often creates baselines and then begins to morph things. So that's why sometimes our perception is not always the truth, because actually it keeps morphing, and it keeps coming up with new narratives, and it keeps coming up with skewed narratives. So having a way to capture how you're feeling in a day, and using poetry for that, or any form of creative writing, is brilliant. And also, I believe that all of us have creative energy in us, and having a means of expressing that creative energy, I think, is healthy for our mental well-being, just as nature is. So if you can combine the two, I think it's win-win.
And listeners, just for you, what is your current writing practice, if you have one? Whether you do integrate some form of journaling into your day, into your week, or whether it is more poetic or not. And for me, my journaling practice started probably in 2020, when I was introduced to the Artist's Way by a coach that I was working with. And the morning pages, 3 pages, became a part of my routine though poetry is still, yeah, still not something. I love writing, I love blogging, and very much a way of processing and sense making. I don't know, maybe a little challenge in there for me. And anyone who's listening in as well would love to know your experiences. Please do share on our LinkedIn community page. We're always keen to hear about your experiences. So, Frank, this time next month, because we are recording this on Monday, the 19th of May, and clearly on Thursday, the 19th of June, we are going to be gathered on the beautiful campus grounds in Greenland. We are going to be there for a 2-day extravaganza in all things outdoor and nature connected coaching. If you're a first-time listener, you may not have heard about this. If you are a listener, I sincerely hope you have. We have been shouting about it from the rooftops, though sometimes things can be hidden on LinkedIn. But Frank, we are delighted you're going to be there. You are going to be performing or reading, whichever way you want to skew it. You will be sharing reflections on the day after soaking up the atmosphere, having conversations, maybe dipping into some of the other workshops and expert talks, of which there are an absolute amazing array to choose from. And you're going to be doing your own expert talk as well. So what lies ahead for participants who are going to be coming along to spend some time with you?
Thank you so much. Before I answer that question, I think I just need to share the anecdote around kind of the whole transferring to be involved in that space and have that, because I think it's, in a way, it helped people see. So like I said earlier on, I still consider myself a beginner when it comes to like really embracing nature in terms of using it in my coaching. But it's something I'd been hearing a lot about, and I'd be kind of thinking, yeah, I'd like to do more of that. I'd like to find out more about that. And so when Annie then connected us together and said, you're running a whole 2 days where there'll be loads of coaches, I'm thinking, wow, that's really the answer to my prayer. That's where I need to be. And I hope you don't mind me sharing. I literally moved my travel arrangements to make this possible, because I thought, what are the chances that I get to be put in residence in a space where I'm going to be soaking up and learning so much and meeting people who are already further down the journey of where I want to be? Because the expertise I'm bringing to there is not so much the coaching outdoors. The expertise is the poetry and the ability to use poetry to encapsulate a nature and also show how we can bring all that together. So for me, it's just an absolute pleasure to have this opportunity to be part of that. And to begin to answer your question, of course, as a poet, I would use poetry as the first part of the answer. And this piece is called Poetry Calls. Poetry calls for your heart to respond. Wisdom communicated in a different voice, activating the ears of your deepest knowing, beyond the veil of your intellectual defenses, resonating with a deeper understanding, leaving the agents of logic scrambling, while the soul finds itself at home, nestling in the arms of Mother Nature. And in a way, that is what I'm going to be inviting people to do at the event, really, is to help as they take in all the wonder and the pleasure and the knowledge and the understanding and all those things. It's because there's this phenomena that happens when you go to events where it's like a retreat and you're away from your normal day-to-day. You learn so much and you're excited in the moment. But when you actually leave and then you get back into your day-to-day, it's so easy for that to peter out, and maybe you only continue one practice, or things just feather out and it feels like, oh, I need another hit like that. I'm waiting until next year. So what I'm really focused on, both in my being in the space and also kind of in the talk that I'm going to be doing, is to help people see ways in which they can use poetry or other kinds of writing to encapsulate in the moment while it's happening or just after it's happened what they're learning, what's different for them. So I developed a framework called focus, which allows them to focus in on what it is they're taking away from the session they just had. Okay, in what small way can they take what they've learned and translate it into some kind of action or difference in their being once they're no longer in that space, and to write something that's encapsulated in that commitment to begin to do that action. And the hope is that by doing that, and they being able to reference that back once they're not in that particular setting, they can become reconnected to that intention and maybe provide energy to allow them to then continue to take those actions, so that actually the experience is translating into differences in how they're being in their day-to-day.
That's great, Brandon. And you know what? Providing energy to carry into their day to day is just such a magical thought in itself. And if our guests and attendees can take that away, I think what a wonderful thought that truly is. It's really interesting, your poem, as I listen to it. There is, for our listeners and for those that have been to Henley, there is a magical place about Henley. It has an atmosphere, an aura that is simply something about learning, and something, it feels very nurtured and very held. There's a wonderful drive. You turn off the road and you head down this drive through nature, and it's almost a transition that it takes me through. I've had a long history with Henley, and people talk about this magical atmosphere. There's something about it. Retreat, treat, even take the re off of that word. There's a treat about it. I don't know. Those words start to come to mind. And I'm really looking forward to you experiencing that and being in that place and seeing how that comes through in your words and many other people, and your encouragement for people to write those words down. I think will be truly magical. And I'm very excited about having you there, Frank, and bringing, as you say, how can we bring out this inner creativity from everyone, including your very good self. So, and including me and Anna Marie and so on. So what a wonderful day, 2 days this will be. And it is our pleasure to have you. And I think this is something going to be very exciting and very different. And that's what we're trying to, Anna Marie and I guess we've co-collaborated and constructed with so many people like your good self, and it's an eclectic mix. There is no offering of a judgment or bias served. We are serving up an absolute smorgasbord of choice, and it's for people to choose and to experience the 2 days and the evening, of course. And that brings another change in the atmosphere. The evening, we've not done that before. So, we do hope you're listening to this, and you're really getting excited and a flavor for these amazing 2 days. And we cannot wait to get everybody there. And if you're a couple of weeks are maybe away, if you haven't bought a ticket, please go on and buy one. And you can do it through the Henley website. There are links all through LinkedIn. If you look for Anna Marie, myself, or the Henley site, you'll be able to find it and come and join us. So, Frank, we're moving towards the end of our podcast today. What resources would you recommend to our community of avid nature connectors? And signpost us whatever you feel may be appropriate. Some books, podcasts, individuals, practices. But I'm sure our listeners would love to hear some signposting.
Indeed. I think I can only go by things that I've connected with and made a big difference to it. One that I mentioned earlier was the book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. That's really very good for connecting to yourself and really understanding yourself, that you're not your mind. The whole idea of object subject and the difference, and becoming a witness to that and giving you that space, I think is great. There's also a book that I read that I think, especially when nature is concerned, Wild Mind by Bill Plotkin is another good one. Another good one is Solve for Happy by Mo Gawdat, Gawdat. see.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'd like to also offer something that's from me. What I'll do when I give you the link, there's a link that I have that all my stuff is on. You can have a look at my space framework. Offer that to your listeners for free. They can go in there and look through it. There's some videos of some live events that we do. So I do monthly live events every fourth Friday where we use poetry as a means for facilitating conversation. So there's some recordings of that intertwined with the space framework there. The book that I mentioned earlier that I did where the funds go to charities called Dream. Again, you wouldn't be surprised to find out that Dream is a framework in itself. And it's Manifest Your Path to Peace, Joy, and Contentment. So again, that will all be on that link. And the link is, it's Linktree, but it's linktr.ee/poetricity. So that's linktr.ee/poetricity. All my contacts are there.
Fantastic.
Amazing, Frank. Thank you for sharing. And as we bring our conversations to a close, whether there is another opportunity for a final poem or not, totally up to you. And then what is the best way for people to reach out and have a conversation with you?
Well, that link I've just given them has my LinkedIn details there. It has the ability to have a chat with me if people want to have a quick chat and just talk about what I do. It has my Instagram, Poetricity, just IG on Instagram. Frank Bolaji Irawo on LinkedIn. Yeah, all those are through that link. I'll give it again just to be 100% clear. So that is linktr.ee/poetricity. Poetricity spelled Poetricity. And not want to turn down an opportunity being given me to read some more poetry. Let's go for Cupped Ears. And this is almost, imagine this is coming from nature itself. It cupped its ears like one listening while glistening in the sun. It was not for words that it was beckoning, but to be understood as one of us. It sought not fancy words, nor highbrow conversation, just exquisite beauty to be seen and taken in. Beauty beyond words, appreciated within the void. The color, the spaces, the curves, the straight places, the parts, the whole, the wonder of it all, observed and assimilated by all the senses. Celebration of diversity, of the one and the same thing, me, you, it, and all. And that, I think, is something that will be an experience at the event.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. Thank you very much, Frank, for all of your lovely poetry today. It's been absolutely wonderful, and it first of all remains for me to thank you for your time today and for being a guest on our Coaching Outdoor podcast episode. Thank you so much, and thank you very much to Anna Marie for being, as always, brilliant co-host. And thank you very much to our listeners and joining us again today. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode with Frank. Wherever you are, keep connecting with nature, keep that coaching and all of that connection going wherever you may be. Do come along to Coaching Outdoor Podcasts live at Henley in a few weeks' time if you are able to. And certainly we would love to hear comments. What have you thought of the episode? What's really landed for you? What's resonated with the work that Frank has beautifully connected us with. And this is a real first, for us, bringing poetry linked to art, linked to the nature in all of its richness. And I'm sure there will be many people that will be really have enjoyed this today, Frank. So thank you so much. And as
Thank
I say,
you so much for having me.
That's brilliant. And we're coming towards our series 9. As I say, we're moving through, and we've got a few more to go. So as I say, keep joining, keep following us, and we're building up that community and that following. And we're very, very appreciative of all of our listeners. So it remains for me just to thank you all and wish you a very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. And we hope to see you again and join you again on another episode. Thank you so much.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard,
Like it
share across your network.
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.